Question 1. The investigation demonstrates that a financial services organization is undertaking a business impact analysis, BIA, to inform its disaster recovery strategy. The IT risk manager is proposing to define recovery time objectives, RTO, and recovery point objectives, RPO, based on the current infrastructure's capabilities and historical system uptime data, without extensive consultation with individual business unit heads. Which of the following approaches best aligns with professional best practices for conducting a BIA in this context? Option A. Define RTOs and RPOs based on the IT department's assessment of what is technically feasible given the existing infrastructure and budget constraints, assuming this will meet business needs. Option B. Focus the BIA primarily on analyzing past system outages and their impact, using this data to extrapolate future recovery requirements for RTOs and RPOs. Option C. Expedite the BIA process by making broad assumptions about business criticality and acceptable recovery times, prioritizing the completion of the document over detailed validation with business units. Option D. Engage directly with each business unit to understand their specific operational dependencies, acceptable downtime, and data loss tolerances, and use this input to collaboratively define RTOs and RPOs that are then validated by business leadership. Correct answer is D. Engage directly with each business unit to understand their specific operational dependencies, acceptable downtime, and data loss tolerances, and use this input to collaboratively define RTOs and RPOs that are then validated by business leadership. Explanation. The investigation demonstrates a common challenge in business impact analysis, BIA, balancing the need for comprehensive data with the practical constraints of time and resources. Identifying critical business functions requires a deep understanding of organizational strategy and interdependencies. Assessing potential impacts necessitates foresight into various disruption scenarios and their cascading effects. Determining recovery time objectives, RTO, and recovery point objectives, RPO, involves translating business needs into quantifiable targets that inform technical recovery strategies. The professional challenge lies in ensuring the BIA is robust enough to be meaningful for disaster recovery and business continuity planning, yet agile enough to be updated as the business evolves. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it aligns with the core principles of risk management and information systems control as mandated by frameworks relevant to the CRISC certification. Specifically, it emphasizes a structured, evidence-based methodology that involves direct engagement with business stakeholders. This ensures that RTOs and RPOs are derived from a genuine understanding of business criticality and tolerance for downtime and data loss, rather than arbitrary assumptions. This stakeholder-driven validation is crucial for the credibility and effectiveness of the subsequent disaster recovery and business continuity plans. It also implicitly supports regulatory compliance by demonstrating due diligence in understanding and mitigating operational risks. An incorrect approach that relies solely on IT department assumptions fails to acknowledge that its primary role is to support business operations. Without business input, IT-driven RTOs/RPOs may not reflect actual business needs, leading to either over-provisioning, unnecessary cost, or under-provisioning, unacceptable business impact. This constitutes a significant ethical failure in risk management, as it misrepresents the organization's true risk exposure. Furthermore, it could lead to non-compliance with any regulations that require demonstrable business continuity capabilities aligned with business needs. Another incorrect approach that focuses only on historical incident data, while useful for context, is insufficient. Historical data may not account for future, unprecedented disruptions or changes in business criticality. Relying solely on this can lead to an incomplete risk assessment and inadequate recovery objectives, potentially violating the principle of proactive risk management and failing to meet the spirit of regulatory requirements for resilience. Finally, an approach that prioritizes speed over accuracy by making broad assumptions without proper validation is professionally unsound. This bypasses the critical step of understanding business impact and tolerance, leading to potentially unrealistic RTOs/RPOs. This can result in significant financial and reputational damage if a disruption occurs, and may be viewed as a failure to exercise due professional care, potentially contravening ethical codes and regulatory expectations for thorough risk assessment. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a phased approach. First, understanding the business context and objectives. Second, engaging key business stakeholders to identify critical functions and their dependencies. Third, assessing potential impacts and defining acceptable downtime and data loss (RTO/RPO). And fourth, validating these objectives with business leadership before translating them into technical recovery strategies. This iterative and collaborative process ensures that risk management efforts are aligned with business realities and regulatory expectations. Question 2. Upon reviewing the current risk landscape, a risk manager is tasked with initiating a comprehensive risk identification process for a financial services organization. The organization operates numerous business units, each with varying levels of technological dependence and regulatory oversight. The risk manager needs to establish a systematic approach to identify potential risks to information systems and data. Which of the following approaches would best align with the principles of effective risk identification for a CRISC professional? Option A. Focus initially on identifying all information assets based on their perceived technical complexity and the number of users accessing them before considering business processes. Option B. Prioritize the identification of all known cyber threats and vulnerabilities across the entire IT infrastructure, regardless of their direct impact on specific business processes. Option C. Begin by identifying the organization's most critical business processes and the information assets that support them. Then identify threats and vulnerabilities to these assets, and finally assess the potential business impact. Option D. Start by thoroughly documenting all applicable industry standards and legal/regulatory requirements, and then map potential risks to these external mandates. The correct answer is C. Begin by identifying the organization's most critical business processes and the information assets that support them, then identify threats and vulnerabilities to these assets, and finally assess the potential business impact. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in risk management, balancing the need for comprehensive risk identification with the practical constraints of time and resources. The risk manager must prioritize efforts to ensure that the most critical assets and their associated risks are addressed first. Failure to do so could lead to significant business disruption, financial loss, or regulatory noncompliance. The challenge lies in developing a systematic and defensible approach to this prioritization. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a structured, top-down methodology that begins with understanding the business objectives and critical business processes. By first identifying the most vital business processes, the risk manager can then determine the critical information assets that support these processes. This allows for a focused identification of threats and vulnerabilities directly impacting these high-priority assets. Subsequently, assessing the potential impact on these critical processes and assets, and then developing relevant risk scenarios ensures that the risk identification efforts are aligned with business criticality and potential harm. This aligns with the principles of effective risk management frameworks, such as those promoted by ISACA for CRISC, which emphasize business alignment and impact-driven risk assessment. It also implicitly addresses legal and regulatory requirements by focusing on the assets and processes most likely to be subject to such mandates. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to solely focus on identifying all known threats and vulnerabilities without first understanding their potential impact on critical business processes or assets. This can lead to an overwhelming and unmanageable list of risks, diverting resources from genuinely high-priority areas. It fails to meet the CRISC objective of prioritizing risk management efforts based on business impact and potential harm, and could lead to overlooking critical risks due to a lack of focus. Another incorrect approach is to prioritize asset identification based purely on perceived technical criticality or the number of users, without a direct link to business processes. While technical importance is a factor, it is the business process that defines the true criticality of an asset. This approach risks misallocating resources to assets that are technically complex but not essential to core business functions, potentially leaving critical business processes exposed. This deviates from a business-centric risk management approach. A third incorrect approach is to begin risk identification by focusing on external industry standards or regulatory requirements in isolation, without first understanding the organization's specific business context and critical assets. While industry standards and regulations are crucial inputs, they should inform the risk identification process, not dictate its starting point. This can lead to a compliance-driven approach that may not adequately address the organization's unique risk profile and critical business operations, potentially missing significant internal risks. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that starts with business context. This involves understanding the organization's strategic objectives and identifying its critical business processes. From this understanding, the risk manager can then identify the information assets that are essential to these processes. The next step is to identify threats and vulnerabilities that could impact these critical assets and processes, followed by an assessment of the potential business impact. This structured, business-aligned approach ensures that risk identification efforts are focused, efficient, and directly contribute to protecting the organization's most valuable functions and data, in line with CRISC principles. Question 3. Operational review demonstrates that while the organization has implemented a virtual private network (VPN) solution to secure remote access, the internal network remains largely flat, with minimal segmentation. The VPN concentrator is configured to allow broad access to internal resources once authenticated. Network monitoring tools are primarily focused on external traffic, with limited visibility into internal network activity. The organization is experiencing an increase in remote users and is considering upgrading the VPN concentrator to handle the increased load. What is the most appropriate course of action to enhance the organization's network security posture? Option A. Upgrade the VPN concentrator to a higher capacity model to accommodate the increased number of remote users. Option B. Rely on the existing VPN's authentication and encryption to secure remote access, assuming it is sufficient for current threats. Option C. Implement a comprehensive network segmentation strategy. Enhance firewall rules to enforce granular access controls between segments, and expand network monitoring to include internal traffic analysis. Option D. Focus on upgrading wireless security protocols to WPA3 across all access points. Correct answer is C. Implement a comprehensive network segmentation strategy. Enhance firewall rules to enforce granular access controls between segments, and expand network monitoring to include internal traffic analysis. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in network security where a seemingly effective solution, VPN, is implemented without a comprehensive understanding of its limitations and the evolving threat landscape. The reliance on a single security control, especially one that can be misconfigured or bypassed, creates a false sense of security. The professional challenge lies in identifying the gap between perceived security and actual risk, and in recommending a layered, defense-in-depth strategy that aligns with established risk management principles and regulatory expectations for information system control. Correct approach analysis. Implementing a robust network segmentation strategy in conjunction with enhanced firewall rules and continuous monitoring represents best professional practice. This approach aligns with the principle of least privilege and defense in depth, which are fundamental to effective information security. Network segmentation limits the lateral movement of threats, reducing the blast radius of a breach. Next-generation firewalls, NGFW, provide deeper inspection capabilities beyond traditional stateful firewalls, enabling more granular policy enforcement and threat detection. Continuous network monitoring allows for the early detection of anomalous activities, which is crucial for timely incident response. This layered approach is implicitly supported by frameworks like CRISC guidelines, which emphasize a holistic view of risk management and control implementation. Incorrect approaches analysis. Relying solely on the VPN for remote access security without addressing internal network vulnerabilities is a significant regulatory and ethical failure. It demonstrates a lack of due diligence in assessing and mitigating risks associated with remote access. This approach fails to meet the expectation of establishing and maintaining effective controls to protect information assets, as mandated by general principles of information security governance. It also creates an ethical concern by potentially exposing the organization to undue risk due to incomplete security measures. Expanding the VPN capacity without reevaluating firewall rules and network segmentation is also problematic. While it addresses the immediate capacity issue, it ignores the underlying risk of a compromised VPN connection gaining unfettered access to the internal network. This oversight can lead to regulatory noncompliance if the organization is expected to implement controls that prevent unauthorized access and limit the impact of security incidents. Ethically, it represents a failure to proactively identify and address potential security weaknesses. Implementing only wireless security upgrades, WPA3, without considering the broader network security posture is insufficient. While WPA3 enhances wireless security, it does not address risks associated with other network access points or internal threats. This narrow focus can lead to regulatory noncompliance if the overall information security program is not comprehensive. It also raises ethical questions about prioritizing one aspect of security over others without a risk-based approach. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a risk-based decision-making process. This involves identifying assets, threats, vulnerabilities, and potential impacts. Security controls should be selected and implemented based on their ability to mitigate identified risks effectively. A defense-in-depth strategy, employing multiple layers of security controls, is generally preferred over relying on a single point of defense. Continuous assessment and improvement of security controls are also critical, especially in response to evolving threats and technological changes. When evaluating security solutions, professionals must consider their integration with existing controls and their contribution to the overall security posture, rather than treating them as isolated components. Question 4. Examination of the data shows a significant increase in security incidents, with forensic analysis consistently pointing to the exploitation of known, unpatched vulnerabilities on user endpoints. The organization's current antivirus/anti-malware solutions are up to date with signatures, and basic device management policies are in place, but patch deployment is inconsistent and often delayed. Which of the following approaches best addresses this situation in accordance with established information security principles and regulatory expectations for maintaining a secure information system? Option A. Implement stringent device management policies that severely restrict user access to external networks and the installation of any unauthorized software. Option B. Enhance the patch management process by integrating it with regular vulnerability scanning and leveraging endpoint detection and response EDR capabilities to monitor for and respond to exploit attempts on vulnerable systems. Option C. Increase the frequency and scope of antivirus/anti-malware signature updates and deploy more aggressive scanning schedules across all endpoints. Option D. Focus on strengthening data loss prevention, DLP, controls to detect and block any unauthorized exfiltration of sensitive data from endpoints. The correct answer is B. Enhance the patch management process by integrating it with regular vulnerability scanning and leveraging endpoint detection and response, EDR, capabilities to monitor for and respond to exploit attempts on vulnerable systems. Explanation. This scenario presents a common challenge in enterprise risk management, balancing the need for robust security controls with operational efficiency and user experience. The organization is experiencing a surge in security incidents directly attributable to unpatched vulnerabilities on user endpoints, indicating a significant gap in their patch management program. The challenge lies in selecting the most effective and compliant response that addresses the root cause without causing undue disruption or violating regulatory expectations for data protection and system integrity. The correct approach involves a comprehensive review and enhancement of the existing patch management process, integrating it with vulnerability scanning and EDR capabilities. This aligns with best practices for information security and is implicitly supported by regulatory frameworks that mandate reasonable security measures to protect sensitive data and systems. For instance, in a U.S. context, frameworks like NIST SB 800-53, which informs FISMA compliance, and the principles underlying HIPAA or PCI DSS emphasize the importance of timely patching and vulnerability remediation as fundamental security controls. EDR provides real-time threat detection and response, which is crucial for identifying and mitigating threats that may bypass traditional antivirus. Integrating these components ensures a proactive and reactive defense posture, addressing both known and emerging threats. An incorrect approach would be to solely rely on increasing antivirus/anti-malware signatures. While important, This is a reactive measure that addresses known threats but does not prevent exploitation of unpatched vulnerabilities. This approach fails to address the root cause of the incidents and would be considered insufficient under regulatory scrutiny, as it demonstrates a lack of proactive vulnerability management. Another incorrect approach is to implement broad, sweeping device management policies that severely restrict user functionality without a clear risk-based justification. While device management is a component of endpoint security, overly restrictive policies can hinder productivity and may not be proportionate to the identified risks, potentially leading to user workarounds that create new security vulnerabilities. Furthermore, without a clear link to specific regulatory requirements or documented risk assessments, such broad restrictions could be challenged as arbitrary and not aligned with a risk-based security program. Finally, focusing solely on enhancing DLP without addressing the underlying vulnerability that allows data exfiltration is a misdirected effort. DLP is designed to prevent sensitive data from leaving the organization, but if endpoints are compromised due to unpatched vulnerabilities, the DLP controls may be bypassed or rendered ineffective. This approach fails to address the initial point of compromise and would be seen as a superficial fix, not a comprehensive risk mitigation strategy, and thus non-compliant with the spirit of regulations requiring effective security controls. Professionals should employ a risk-based decision-making framework. This involves 1. Identifying and assessing the specific risks, e.g., unpatched vulnerabilities leading to data breaches. 2. Evaluating existing controls and their effectiveness, e.g., current patch management, EDR capabilities. 3. Determining the most effective and efficient mitigation strategies that align with regulatory requirements and business objectives. 4. Implementing and continuously monitoring the chosen controls. Question 5. Performance analysis shows that while the Chief Information Security Officer, CISO, has overall responsibility for information security, the organization is experiencing delays in critical incident response due to unclear delegation of authority. Which of the following organizational structures and role definitions best addresses this challenge while ensuring effective governance and operational efficiency? Option A. Incident response is primarily managed by the IT operations team, with the CISO providing general oversight and the security committee only being informed of major breaches after they have been contained. Option B. The incident response team is empowered to execute pre-approved incident response plans autonomously, with direct reporting of significant incidents to the CISO and regular updates provided to the security committee. Option C. The CISO delegates all incident response decision-making to the head of IT infrastructure, who then coordinates with the security operations and incident response teams as needed. Option D. The CISO retains ultimate decision-making authority for all incident response actions, with the security operations team and incident response team acting solely as information providers to the CISO office. The correct answer is D. The CISO retains ultimate decision-making authority for all incident response actions, with the security operations team and incident response team acting solely as information providers to the CISO office. Explanation. This scenario presents a common challenge in information security governance, balancing the strategic oversight of security with the operational execution of security controls and incident response. The professional challenge lies in ensuring that the organizational structure effectively supports the CISO mandate, while also empowering specialized teams to act decisively and efficiently. Careful judgment is required to align roles, responsibilities, and reporting lines to prevent bottlenecks, ensure accountability, and foster a proactive security culture. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it establishes clear lines of authority and communication between the CISO, the security operations team, and the incident response team. This structure ensures that the CISO has visibility into operational activities and can provide strategic direction, while the specialized teams have the autonomy and expertise to execute their functions effectively. This aligns with the principles of good governance and risk management, emphasizing clear accountability and the establishment of robust incident response capabilities, which are implicitly expected under frameworks like NIST CSF or ISO 27001, even if not explicitly detailed in a specific regulatory text for this exam. The proactive engagement of the Security Committee ensures that strategic security decisions are informed by operational realities and that cross-functional buy-in is achieved. An incorrect approach that centralizes all incident response decision-making solely within the CISO office, bypassing the dedicated incident response team, would be professionally unacceptable. This would create a significant bottleneck, delay critical response actions, and likely lead to suboptimal outcomes during a high-pressure incident. It undermines the expertise of the specialized team and demonstrates a lack of trust, potentially leading to decreased morale and effectiveness. Ethically, it could also lead to a failure to meet due diligence obligations in protecting organizational assets. Another incorrect approach that delegates incident response authority to the IT operations team without clear reporting lines to the CISO or a dedicated incident response function would also be professionally unacceptable. This dilutes accountability, risks conflicting priorities between routine IT operations and critical security incident management, and may result in a lack of specialized incident handling skills. It fails to establish a clear governance structure for security incidents, potentially leading to inconsistent or inadequate responses, which could have significant legal and reputational consequences. A third incorrect approach that excludes the security committee from reviewing and approving incident response plans would be professionally unacceptable. The security committee, by its nature, is intended to provide oversight and strategic guidance. Excluding them from critical plans like incident response means that these plans may not be aligned with the overall business risk appetite or strategic objectives, and the committee may not be adequately informed to fulfill its governance responsibilities. This can lead to a disconnect between security strategy and execution, and a failure to secure necessary resources or executive support for incident response. The professional reasoning process for similar situations should involve a thorough understanding of the organization's risk appetite, regulatory obligations, and operational capabilities. It requires mapping security responsibilities to clear roles and reporting structures, ensuring that specialized teams are empowered and that governance mechanisms, such as security committees, are effectively utilized. The decision-making framework should prioritize clear accountability, efficient communication, and the establishment of robust processes that can be executed effectively under pressure, always considering the potential impact on business operations and stakeholder trust. Question 6. Compliance review shows that a critical system update, essential for meeting a new regulatory reporting deadline, is scheduled for implementation next week. However, the Designated Change Advisory Board (CAB) meeting is not until 2 weeks after the deadline. The project manager is requesting that the update be implemented immediately, bypassing the standard change management procedure, arguing that the business impact of missing the deadline far outweighs the risks of an unapproved change. As the risk and information systems control professional, what is the most appropriate course of action? Option A. Advocate for an expedited but formally documented and approved emergency change process that includes a thorough risk assessment and sign-off from relevant stakeholders, even if it requires convening an ad hoc review. Option B. Implement the update without any formal approval or documentation, as the business urgency is paramount and overrides standard procedures. Option C. Delay the update until the next scheduled CAB meeting, ensuring full adherence to the change management policy, even if it means missing the regulatory deadline. Option D. Proceed with the update immediately based on the project manager's verbal authorization, and document the deviation from policy after the fact. The correct answer is A. Advocate for an expedited but formally documented and approved emergency change process that includes a thorough risk assessment and sign-off from relevant stakeholders, even if it requires convening an ad hoc review. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common ethical dilemma in risk and information systems control where a perceived business expediency clashes with established security policies and procedures. The challenge lies in balancing the immediate need for a critical system update with the potential long-term risks of bypassing established change management processes. The pressure to deliver quickly can lead to shortcuts that undermine the integrity of the control environment. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach prioritizes adherence to the established change management policy. This aligns with the fundamental principles of IT governance and risk management, emphasizing the importance of documented, approved, and tested changes to information systems. In the context of CRISC, this reflects the need to ensure that controls are effectively designed and implemented to mitigate risks. The Osaka Code of Ethics, which underpins CRISC, mandates adherence to laws and regulations, and acting in the best interest of the organization, which includes protecting its information assets through robust processes. Bypassing change management, even for a critical update, introduces unmanaged risk, potentially leading to system instability, security vulnerabilities, or data corruption, all of which are contrary to the organization's best interests and its risk appetite. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach involves proceeding with the update without formal approval, but documenting the deviation afterward. This is a failure to adhere to the change management policy's proactive control requirements. While documentation is important, it does not mitigate the risks introduced by an unapproved and untested change. This approach violates the principle of due diligence and could be seen as a circumvention of established governance, potentially leading to regulatory noncompliance if the change causes a breach or service disruption. Another incorrect approach is to proceed with the update based on the project manager's verbal authorization. This bypasses the documented, multi-stakeholder approval process inherent in effective change management. Verbal authorizations are not auditable and do not provide the necessary evidence of risk assessment and control validation. This approach creates significant governance gaps and increases the likelihood of unintended consequences, failing to uphold the professional responsibility to ensure that changes are managed in a controlled and risk-aware manner. A third incorrect approach is to delay the update until the next scheduled change window, even though it means missing a critical business deadline. While this adheres to the letter of the policy, it fails to adequately consider the business impact and the organization's risk appetite. A truly effective risk management process involves assessing the risks of both taking action and not taking action. In such a situation, a more nuanced approach might involve an expedited, but still documented and approved, emergency change process, rather than a complete delay that causes significant business harm. This approach, by rigidly adhering to a schedule without considering business criticality, might not represent the most effective risk mitigation strategy. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a structured decision-making process that begins with understanding the established policies and procedures. When faced with a conflict between expediency and policy, the first step is to assess the potential risks of deviating from the policy. This assessment should consider the impact on security, data integrity, system stability, and regulatory compliance. If a deviation is deemed necessary, the process should involve seeking appropriate authorization through an expedited or emergency change process, ensuring that all necessary risk assessments and approvals are obtained, even if under time pressure. Documentation of the rationale for the expedited process and the approvals granted is crucial for auditability and accountability. This approach balances business needs with robust risk management and governance. Question 7. Analysis of an organization's approach to onboarding a new cloud service provider that will process personal data of European Union residents, considering the implementation challenges of ensuring compliance with the General Data Protection Regulation, GDPR, within a U.S.-based company's existing vendor management framework. Which of the following strategies best balances the need for efficient onboarding with robust data protection and legal compliance? Option A. Rely on the cloud service provider's self-attestation of GDPR compliance and a standard confidentiality agreement, assuming their internal processes are sufficient. Option B. Integrate GDPR-specific data protection requirements, including data processing agreements, security measures, and breach notification protocols, into the vendor assessment framework and ensure these are reflected in contractual clauses before onboarding. Option C. Expedite the onboarding process by including only generic confidentiality clauses in the contract, deferring detailed data privacy discussions until after the service is operational. Option D. Delegate the entire responsibility for GDPR compliance verification to the cloud service provider's legal counsel, trusting their assessment of their own adherence. The correct answer is B. Integrate GDPR-specific data protection requirements, including data processing agreements, security measures, and breach notification protocols, into the vendor assessment framework, and ensure these are reflected in contractual clauses before onboarding. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in risk and information systems control, balancing the need for efficient vendor onboarding with robust compliance with data privacy regulations, specifically the General Data Protection Regulation, GDPR, as it applies to a US-based company processing data of EU residents. The challenge lies in the potential for a streamlined process to overlook critical data protection clauses, leading to significant legal and reputational risks. The pressure to onboard quickly can create a conflict with the due diligence required by GDPR. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach demonstrates a commitment to regulatory compliance and risk mitigation. By integrating GDPR-specific data protection requirements into the vendor assessment framework and ensuring contractual clauses address data processing, security measures, and breach notification, the organization proactively addresses legal obligations. This aligns with GDPR principles of data protection by design and by default, and Article 28, which mandates specific contractual obligations for data processors. It also reflects best practices in vendor risk management, ensuring that third parties handling sensitive data meet the organization's security and privacy standards. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach fails by relying solely on the vendor's self-attestation of compliance without independent verification. This is a significant regulatory failure under GDPR, as it does not fulfill the controller's obligation to ensure processors provide sufficient guarantees of compliance. It also bypasses essential risk assessment steps, potentially exposing the organization to data breaches and non-compliance penalties. Ethically, it represents a dereliction of duty to protect personal data. Another incorrect approach is to defer all data privacy responsibilities to the vendor's legal counsel. A legal counsel is important. The primary responsibility for ensuring compliance with data privacy regulations like GDPR rests with the organization itself, the data controller. This approach abdicates the organization's duty to conduct its own due diligence and embed privacy considerations into its vendor management processes, leading to potential regulatory violations and increased risk. A third incorrect approach is to prioritize speed of onboarding over thoroughness by only including generic confidentiality clauses. GDPR requires specific provisions related to data processing, security, and data subject rights when personal data is involved. Generic clauses are insufficient to address the detailed requirements of data protection laws, leaving the organization exposed to breaches of contract and regulatory noncompliance. This approach prioritizes business expediency over legal and ethical obligations. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a risk-based approach to vendor management, integrating regulatory requirements into every stage of the vendor lifecycle. This involves developing a comprehensive vendor assessment framework that explicitly includes data privacy and security controls, conducting thorough due diligence, negotiating robust contractual agreements that reflect legal obligations, and establishing ongoing monitoring mechanisms. When faced with competing priorities, professionals must advocate for a balanced approach that upholds compliance and risk management principles, even if it requires additional time or resources. The decision-making process should involve consulting with legal and compliance experts, understanding the specific regulatory landscape, and prioritizing the protection of personal data and the organization's reputation. Question 8. Process analysis reveals a critical security incident involving unauthorized access to a sensitive customer database. The incident response team has identified the initial point of compromise and has evidence of data exfiltration. The primary goal is to stop the ongoing damage and restore services as quickly as possible, while also preserving evidence for investigation. Which of the following strategies best balances these competing priorities in accordance with U.S. regulatory expectations for incident response? Option A. Focus solely on eradicating the identified threat actor from the network, even if it means temporarily disabling critical business functions, to ensure the threat is completely neutralized. Option B. Implement network segmentation to isolate the compromised systems from the rest of the network, allowing for targeted eradication and recovery while continuing to monitor for malicious activity and preserve critical forensic data. Option C. Immediately disconnect all affected systems from the network to prevent further data loss, then proceed with forensic imaging and analysis before initiating eradication and recovery. Option D. Initiate a full system rollback to a known good state from the last backup without further investigation to ensure rapid service restoration. The correct answer is C. Immediately disconnect all affected systems from the network to prevent further data loss, then proceed with forensic imaging and analysis before initiating eradication and recovery. Explanation. This scenario presents a common challenge in incident response, balancing the urgency of containment and eradication with the need for thorough investigation and minimal business disruption. The professional challenge lies in making rapid, informed decisions under pressure, where incorrect choices can lead to significant data loss, prolonged downtime, reputational damage, and regulatory penalties. The need for a structured, risk-based approach is paramount. The correct approach prioritizes immediate containment to prevent further spread, followed by a systematic eradication and recovery process. This aligns with best practices in information security and incident response frameworks, which emphasize minimizing impact and restoring normal operations efficiently. Specifically, within the U.S. regulatory landscape, frameworks like NIST SB 800-61 Revision 2, Computer Security Incident Handling Guide, provide detailed guidance on these phases. Adhering to such frameworks ensures a structured, repeatable, and defensible incident response process, which is crucial for demonstrating due diligence to regulators and stakeholders. This approach minimizes the window of vulnerability and reduces the potential for data exfiltration or system corruption. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on immediate system shutdown without proper analysis risks unnecessary business interruption and data loss. This could violate the principle of proportionality in incident response and may not be justifiable under regulations that require organizations to maintain business operations where feasible. Another incorrect approach that delays eradication due to a desire to preserve forensic evidence at the expense of containing the threat could lead to the incident escalating, resulting in greater damage and potentially more severe regulatory scrutiny for failing to act promptly to protect sensitive data. Furthermore, an approach that bypasses established recovery procedures, even with good intentions, can introduce new vulnerabilities or lead to incomplete restoration. Failing to meet the organization's recovery time objectives, RTO, and recovery point objectives, RPO, which are often implicitly or explicitly required by regulations like HIPAA for covered entities. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that integrates incident response phases with business impact analysis and regulatory requirements. This involves 1. Rapid assessment of the incident's scope and potential impact. 2. Prioritizing containment actions based on risk to critical assets and data. 3. Developing and executing eradication and recovery plans that are aligned with business continuity and disaster recovery strategies. 4. Documenting all actions taken for post-incident review and regulatory compliance. This structured approach ensures that decisions are not only technically sound, but also strategically aligned with organizational resilience and legal obligations. Question 9. Quality control measures reveal that a critical project is experiencing delays due to the time taken to provision access for new team members. The project manager has requested expedited access provisioning, suggesting that standard approval workflows be bypassed for this project to meet aggressive deadlines. Option A. Rely on the project manager's verbal confirmation to grant the necessary access to project team members, bypassing the standard documentation and approval steps. Option B. Implement a streamlined but still documented and approved access provisioning process for the project team, ensuring all access granted adheres to the principle of least privilege and is logged for audit purposes. Option C. Defer the formal access review and approval process for the project team until after the project has been successfully delivered, focusing solely on meeting the project deadline. Option D. Grant all project team members broad, temporary administrative access to all systems relevant to the project, with a verbal agreement from the project manager to revoke access once the project is complete. The correct answer is B. Implement a streamlined but still documented and approved access provisioning process for the project team, ensuring all access granted adheres to the principle of least privilege and is logged for audit purposes. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in access control management where a perceived need for efficiency clashes with established security principles. The pressure to expedite onboarding for a critical project creates a risk of bypassing or inadequately applying access control policies, potentially leading to unauthorized access and data breaches. The challenge lies in balancing business agility with robust security governance. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach emphasizes the importance of adhering to established access control policies and procedures, even under pressure. This aligns with the fundamental principles of information security and risk management, which are central to the CRISC certification. Specifically, it upholds the principle of least privilege, ensuring users are granted only the necessary access to perform their duties. This approach is best professional practice because it minimizes the attack surface and reduces the likelihood of insider threats or accidental data exposure. It also supports auditability and compliance with regulatory frameworks that mandate strong access controls. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach involves granting broad, temporary access without proper authorization or documentation. This violates the principle of least privilege and creates significant security risks. It bypasses the established review and approval processes, making it difficult to track who has access to what and for how long, which is a direct contravention of many regulatory requirements for access management and accountability. Another incorrect approach is to defer the access review process until after the project is completed. This creates a period of elevated risk where unauthorized access may persist undetected. It demonstrates a lack of proactive risk management and fails to address potential security gaps in a timely manner, which is a failure in due diligence and can lead to noncompliance with data protection regulations. A third incorrect approach is to rely solely on the project manager's verbal confirmation for access grants. This lacks the necessary formal documentation and audit trail required for effective access control. Verbal approvals are not auditable and can lead to disputes or misinterpretations, undermining the integrity of the access control system and potentially violating compliance mandates that require documented access provisioning. Professional reasoning. Professionals facing such situations should first understand the business need and the associated risks. They should then engage with stakeholders to explain the security implications of bypassing controls. If a deviation is absolutely necessary, it should be formally documented, risk-assessed, and approved by appropriate authorities with a clear plan for remediation. The decision-making process should prioritize adherence to policy and regulatory requirements, seeking to find secure alternatives rather than compromising security. Question 10. Research into the most effective strategy for enhancing the security posture of a newly developed web application. Considering limited development resources and an aggressive deployment schedule, a security team is evaluating several approaches. One approach suggests prioritizing comprehensive input validation and output encoding for all user-supplied data. Another proposes focusing on implementing a robust web application firewall, WAF, to filter malicious traffic. A third advocates for conducting extensive vulnerability scanning and penetration testing to identify and remediate critical flaws before deployment. A fourth suggests a phased approach, starting with basic secure coding principles and then layering on WAF protection. Which of these approaches best aligns with industry best practices for application security and risk management in this context? Option A. Implementing basic secure coding principles and then layering on WAF protection. Option B. Conducting extensive vulnerability scanning and penetration testing to identify and remediate critical flaws before deployment. Option C. Focusing on implementing a robust web application firewall, WAF, to filter malicious traffic. Option D. Prioritizing comprehensive input validation and output encoding for all user-supplied data. The correct answer is B. Conducting extensive vulnerability scanning and penetration testing to identify and remediate critical flaws before deployment. Explanation. This scenario presents a common challenge in application security, balancing the need for robust security controls with the practicalities of development timelines and resource constraints. The core difficulty lies in prioritizing which security measures to implement when faced with a broad range of potential vulnerabilities and limited capacity. Careful judgment is required to ensure that the most critical risks are addressed effectively without unduly hindering business operations or product delivery. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it aligns with the principles of risk management and the established guidelines for secure software development, as typically emphasized in frameworks relevant to the CRISC certification. Specifically, it prioritizes vulnerability scanning and penetration testing to identify actual weaknesses in the application before implementing specific controls like input validation or output encoding. This data-driven approach ensures that resources are focused on the most impactful security measures. Furthermore, It acknowledges the role of web application firewalls, WAF, as a supplementary layer of defense, not a primary solution for inherent code vulnerabilities. This aligns with the principle of defense in depth. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on implementing input validation and output encoding without prior assessment fails to address the full spectrum of potential application vulnerabilities. It assumes a comprehensive understanding of all potential attack vectors, which is rarely the case. This can lead to misallocation of resources, addressing minor issues while overlooking more critical ones, and potentially leaving the application exposed to threats not covered by these specific controls. Ethically, it represents a failure to exercise due diligence in protecting sensitive data and systems. Another incorrect approach that relies exclusively on penetration testing without subsequent secure coding practices is also professionally unacceptable. While penetration testing is crucial for identifying vulnerabilities, it is a point-in-time assessment. Without addressing the root causes through secure coding and validation, the application will remain susceptible to the same or similar vulnerabilities in the future. This approach is reactive rather than proactive and fails to build security into the development lifecycle. It can also lead to repeated findings in subsequent tests, indicating a lack of fundamental improvement. A further incorrect approach that prioritizes the implementation of a web application firewall, WAF, as the sole security measure is fundamentally flawed. A WAF is a valuable tool for mitigating known web-based attacks, but it is not a substitute for secure coding practices. It acts as a shield, but if the underlying application is insecure, attackers may find ways to bypass the WAF or exploit vulnerabilities that the WAF is not designed to detect. Relying solely on a WAF can create a false sense of security and neglect the essential task of building secure code from the ground up. This represents a significant ethical lapse in ensuring the integrity and confidentiality of information systems. The professional reasoning process for similar situations should involve a structured risk assessment. This begins with identifying potential threats and vulnerabilities relevant to the application's context. Subsequently, the impact and likelihood of these risks should be evaluated. Based on this assessment, security controls should be prioritized, starting with foundational secure coding practices, followed by vulnerability identification through scanning and testing, and then supplemented by layered defenses like WAFs. Continuous monitoring and reassessment are also critical components of a mature application security program. Question 11. Operational review demonstrates that the data center's environmental controls are functioning within acceptable parameters, but surveillance systems are outdated and do not cover all critical access points. Additionally, media storage procedures for sensitive data are not consistently followed, and the physical access control system logs are not regularly reviewed for anomalies. What is the most appropriate next step to ensure effective physical security and risk mitigation? Option A. Defer all physical security improvements until the next fiscal year to align with budget planning cycles. Option B. Focus solely on enhancing the physical access control system logs review process, as this is a direct indicator of unauthorized entry. Option C. Conduct a comprehensive risk assessment to identify and prioritize physical security vulnerabilities based on their potential impact, and develop a remediation plan accordingly. Option D. Immediately upgrade all surveillance systems to the latest technology and implement a strict policy for media storage and disposal. Correct answer is C. Conduct a comprehensive risk assessment to identify and prioritize physical security vulnerabilities based on their potential impact, and develop a remediation plan accordingly. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the immediate need for operational continuity with the long-term implications of inadequate physical security controls. The risk of data breaches, unauthorized access, and environmental damage is significant, potentially leading to financial losses, reputational damage, and regulatory penalties. A CRISC professional must apply a systematic impact assessment to prioritize remediation efforts effectively. The correct approach involves conducting a comprehensive risk assessment that quantifies the potential impact of identified physical security weaknesses. This assessment should consider the likelihood of a threat exploiting a vulnerability and the severity of the consequences, e.g., financial, operational, reputational, legal. By prioritizing risks based on their potential impact, resources can be allocated to address the most critical vulnerabilities first, aligning with the principle of risk mitigation, and the Osaka Code of Professional Ethics, which emphasizes acting in the best interest of stakeholders and maintaining professional competence. This approach ensures that remediation efforts are data-driven and focused on achieving the greatest reduction in overall risk exposure, which is a core tenet of effective information systems control. An incorrect approach would be to immediately implement all identified security improvements without a prior impact assessment. This is inefficient, potentially costly, and may not address the most significant risks. It fails to demonstrate professional judgment in resource allocation and could lead to overspending on low-impact controls while neglecting high-impact vulnerabilities. This could be seen as a failure to adhere to the principle of due care and diligence. Another incorrect approach is to focus solely on the cost of implementing new controls without considering the potential cost of a security incident. This is a myopic view that neglects the potential financial and non-financial impacts of a breach or disruption. It violates the ethical obligation to protect organizational assets and could lead to significant financial and reputational damage, failing to uphold the duty of care. A further incorrect approach is to defer all remediation until a future budget cycle without assessing the immediate risk exposure. This demonstrates a lack of urgency and a failure to proactively manage risks. It exposes the organization to unnecessary threats and could result in severe consequences that outweigh any short-term cost savings, potentially violating the principle of acting with integrity and in the best interests of the organization. The professional reasoning process should involve 1. Identifying all physical security vulnerabilities. 2. Assessing the potential impact of each vulnerability being exploited, considering various risk categories. 3. Quantifying or qualitatively ranking the risks based on impact and likelihood. 4. Prioritizing remediation efforts based on the risk assessment, focusing on controls that offer the highest risk reduction for the investment. 5. Developing a phased implementation plan for controls, considering resource availability and dependencies. 6. Regularly reviewing and updating the risk assessment and control effectiveness. Question 12. Strategic planning requires a comprehensive approach to information security that effectively integrates with the organization's overall business objectives. Which of the following best describes the most effective method for developing and implementing an information security strategy that aligns with business goals and ensures appropriate resource allocation? Option A. Conduct a thorough analysis of business objectives and risk appetite. Define a security vision and mission that supports these objectives, develop supporting policies and standards, and then align resource allocation and budget management to execute the strategy. Option B. Focus primarily on developing and delivering comprehensive security awareness training programs for all employees, as human error is the leading cause of security incidents. Option C. Prioritize the implementation of the most advanced security technologies available, as these will inherently provide the best protection for business assets regardless of specific business objectives. Option D. Develop a detailed security strategy document based on industry best practices, and then present it to business leaders for approval without significant prior consultation. The correct answer is A. Conduct a thorough analysis of business objectives and risk appetite, define a security vision and mission that supports these objectives, develop supporting policies and standards, and then align resource allocation and budget management to execute the strategy. Explanation. This scenario presents a common challenge in information security, where the strategic direction of security initiatives must be demonstrably linked to overarching business objectives. The difficulty lies in translating abstract business goals into concrete, measurable security strategies, and then securing the necessary resources. A failure to align security with business objectives can lead to misallocation of resources, ineffective controls, and a perception of security as a cost center rather than a business enabler. Correct approach, which involves a structured process of identifying business objectives, defining a security vision and mission that supports them, developing policies and standards, and then aligning resource allocation and budget management accordingly, represents best professional practice. This aligns with the principles of good governance and risk management, ensuring that security investments directly contribute to the organization's success and resilience. From a regulatory perspective, frameworks like those often referenced in CRISC examinations, e.g., NIST, ISO 27001, COBIT, Emphasize this alignment to ensure that information security is integrated into the overall enterprise risk management framework and supports business strategy. Ethical considerations also demand that resources are used efficiently and effectively to protect the organization's assets and stakeholders. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on implementing the latest security technologies without a clear link to business objectives is professionally unacceptable. This often results in shelfware or solutions that do not address the most critical risks to the business, leading to wasted expenditure and a false sense of security. Ethically, it represents a failure to act in the best interest of the organization by not prioritizing risk mitigation effectively. Another incorrect approach, prioritizing security awareness programs above all else without a foundational strategy or adequate technical controls, is also flawed. While awareness is crucial, it cannot compensate for fundamental strategic gaps or a lack of robust technical and procedural safeguards. This can lead to a misallocation of budget and effort, neglecting other critical areas of security. A third incorrect approach, developing a security strategy in isolation from business stakeholders, is a significant ethical and professional failure. It demonstrates a lack of collaboration and understanding of the business's needs and priorities, leading to a strategy that is likely to be ignored or actively resisted, ultimately failing to achieve its intended purpose and potentially creating friction within the organization. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a thorough understanding of the organization's business objectives, risk appetite, and regulatory obligations. This understanding should then inform the development of a security vision and mission. Subsequently, policies and standards should be derived from this vision, and security initiatives, including awareness programs and technology investments, should be prioritized based on their contribution to achieving business objectives and mitigating identified risks. Resource allocation and budget management must be directly tied to this prioritized strategy, ensuring that investments are justified by their expected business value and risk reduction. Regular review and adaptation of the strategy based on changes in the business environment and threat landscape are also critical. Question 13. Which approach would be most effective in managing the post-incident activities following a significant data breach, ensuring compliance with regulatory frameworks, and fostering continuous improvement in information security controls? Option A. Immediately focus on public relations and customer communication, while deferring detailed root cause analysis and evidence preservation to a later date to avoid further negative publicity. Option B. Prioritize the immediate implementation of technical patches and system upgrades to address the symptoms of the breach, without conducting a thorough root cause analysis or considering broader policy or procedural changes. Option C. Delegate the entire post-incident review process to the IT security team, limiting external stakeholder involvement and focusing solely on technical remediation without formal documentation of lessons learned or regulatory reporting. Option D. Conduct a comprehensive root cause analysis, meticulously preserve all relevant evidence, document lessons learned, and implement targeted security improvements based on the findings, while also fulfilling all legal and regulatory reporting obligations promptly. Correct answer is A. Immediately focus on public relations and customer communication, while deferring detailed root cause analysis and evidence preservation to a later date to avoid further negative publicity. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the critical need to balance immediate incident containment with long-term risk mitigation and regulatory compliance. The organization has experienced a significant data breach, necessitating a thorough post-incident review. The challenge lies in ensuring that the lessons learned are effectively translated into actionable security improvements, while also adhering to legal and regulatory reporting obligations and preserving evidence for potential future investigations. Careful judgment is required to prioritize these competing demands without compromising any critical aspect. The correct approach emphasizes a structured, comprehensive post-incident review process that integrates root cause analysis with evidence preservation and proactive security enhancements. This aligns with best professional practices for incident response and risk management, as it aims to prevent recurrence and strengthen the overall security posture. Specifically, in the context of the Certified in Risk and Information Systems Control (CRISC) framework, this approach supports the domain of incident management and response, ensuring that identified vulnerabilities are addressed and that the organization learns from its experiences to improve its risk management capabilities. It also implicitly supports compliance with various data protection regulations by focusing on remediation and future prevention. An incorrect approach that prioritizes immediate public relations over thorough analysis and evidence preservation would be professionally unacceptable. This failure would violate ethical obligations to stakeholders and potentially contravene regulatory requirements for accurate and timely reporting. For instance, if the organization were subject to the General Data Protection Regulation, GDPR, or similar data privacy laws, failing to conduct a proper root cause analysis or preserve evidence could lead to significant fines and reputational damage. Another incorrect approach that focuses solely on technical fixes without addressing underlying process or policy failures would be insufficient. This would represent a failure to learn the lessons learned aspect of post-incident activities, leading to a superficial remediation that does not address the systemic issues that contributed to the breach. This neglects the holistic risk management perspective expected of a CRISC professional. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a systematic evaluation of post-incident activities. This includes 1. Immediately securing the environment and preserving evidence according to established protocols. 2. Convening a cross-functional incident response team to conduct a thorough root cause analysis. 3. Documenting all findings, including technical, procedural, and human factors. 4. Identifying and prioritizing security improvements based on the root cause analysis. 5. Determining legal and regulatory reporting obligations and fulfilling them accurately and promptly. 6. Conducting a lessons learned session to disseminate findings and ensure organizational learning. This structured approach ensures that all critical aspects of post-incident management are addressed, leading to effective remediation and improved resilience. Question 14. The review process indicates that while the organization has developed a comprehensive business impact analysis, BIA, and a detailed disaster recovery plan, DRP, with defined recovery time objectives, RTO, and recovery point objectives, RPO, the effectiveness of these plans in a real-world scenario remains unverified. The current testing methodology primarily consists of annual tabletop exercises where key personnel discuss potential disaster scenarios and their responses. What is the most appropriate next step to ensure the organization's business continuity and disaster recovery capabilities are robust and reliable? Option A. Implement a phased approach to functional testing, starting with critical system recovery and gradually expanding to full business process simulation, documenting all results and remediation actions. Option B. Focus on enhancing the documentation of the existing DRP, ensuring all procedures are clearly written and accessible to all relevant personnel. Option C. Update the BIA to reflect the latest business priorities and then conduct another series of tabletop exercises to ensure all stakeholders are aware of the updated plan. Option D. Conduct a risk assessment specifically on the data backup and recovery processes to identify potential vulnerabilities in that single area. The correct answer is A. Implement a phased approach to functional testing, starting with critical system recovery and gradually expanding to full business process simulation, documenting all results and remediation actions. Explanation. The review process indicates a common challenge in business continuity and disaster recovery: the disconnect between theoretical planning and practical execution, particularly concerning the effectiveness of testing. Organizations often invest heavily in developing business impact analyses, BIA, and disaster recovery plans, DRP, but fail to validate their efficacy through rigorous testing. This gap can lead to a false sense of security, leaving the organization vulnerable when a real disaster strikes. The professional challenge lies in ensuring that the BIA accurately reflects business criticality, that recovery objectives, RTO and RPO, are realistic and achievable, and that the DRP is not just a document but a tested, functional strategy. The correct approach emphasizes a comprehensive and iterative testing methodology that goes beyond simple tabletop exercises. It involves simulating realistic disaster scenarios to validate the DRP, identify gaps, and refine recovery procedures. This aligns with best practices for ensuring operational resilience and meeting regulatory expectations for preparedness. Specifically, for a CRISC professional operating within a U.S. regulatory framework, This approach is crucial for demonstrating due diligence and compliance with frameworks like NIST SB 800-34, Contingency Planning Guide for Federal Information Systems, and potentially industry-specific regulations that mandate robust business continuity and disaster recovery capabilities. The focus on testing the actual recovery processes, not just the documentation, is key to validating RTOs and RPOs and ensuring that data backup and recovery mechanisms are effective. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on documentation without validation fails to meet the spirit and often the letter of regulatory requirements. For instance, relying only on a BIA and DRP without conducting functional tests means the organization cannot prove that its stated RTOs and RPOs are achievable or that the recovery procedures will actually work. This represents a significant ethical failure in risk management, as it misrepresents the organization's preparedness to stakeholders and regulators. Another incorrect approach might involve testing only a single component of the recovery process, such as data backup restoration, while neglecting the broader business process recovery. This is insufficient because it doesn't account for interdependencies between systems and processes, leading to an incomplete picture of recovery capabilities and potentially missing critical failure points. Such an approach would likely be deemed inadequate by auditors and regulators who expect a holistic validation of the entire DRP. Professionals should adopt a decision-making framework that prioritizes validation and continuous improvement. This involves 1. Understanding the business context and criticality through a thorough BIA. 2. Defining realistic and measurable RTOs and RPOs based on the BIA. 3. Developing a comprehensive DRP that addresses all critical recovery aspects. 4. Implementing a structured testing program with clear objectives, scenarios, and success criteria. 5. Documenting test results, identifying deficiencies, and implementing corrective action. 6. Regularly reviewing and updating the BIA, DRP, and testing program based on changes in the business environment, technology, and test outcomes. This iterative process ensures that the organization's resilience posture is continuously strengthened and demonstrably effective. Question 15. The analysis reveals a high probability, moderate impact risk related to a critical information system's vulnerability. While the potential financial loss from a single incident is significant but manageable, the likelihood of such an incident occurring within the next fiscal year is estimated to be over 60%. The organization's risk appetite statement indicates a preference for proactive risk mitigation when potential impacts are severe, even if the probability is not extremely high. Given these factors, which of the following represents the most appropriate decision-making approach? Option A. Focus solely on improving the qualitative description of the risk and its potential reputational damage, as quantitative financial analysis is not feasible for this type of system vulnerability. Option B. Allocate resources to address lower probability, high-impact risks first, as these are typically considered more critical by senior management, and revisit this vulnerability if resources permit. Option C. Defer significant investment in mitigation until a loss event actually occurs, as the current financial impact of a single incident is deemed manageable and the probability, while high, does not guarantee an incident. Option D. Prioritize the implementation of robust, albeit costly, mitigation controls for this vulnerability, as the high probability and potential for severe impact, combined with the stated risk appetite, warrant immediate and comprehensive action. The correct answer is D. Prioritize the implementation of robust, albeit costly, mitigation controls for this vulnerability, as the high probability and potential for severe impact, combined with the stated risk appetite, warrant immediate and comprehensive action. Explanation. Scenario analysis. The scenario presents a common challenge in risk management where a significant identified risk, while not immediately catastrophic, has a high probability of occurring and a potentially severe impact on business operations and reputation. The difficulty lies in balancing the cost of mitigation against the potential, albeit not guaranteed, future loss. The organization's stated risk appetite, which leans towards conservative risk-taking, adds another layer of complexity, requiring a decision that aligns with strategic objectives while remaining within acceptable risk boundaries. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a comprehensive cost-benefit analysis that considers both quantitative and qualitative factors. This includes estimating the annual loss expectancy (AL) and single loss expectancy SLE, to quantify potential financial losses, and then comparing these to the cost of implementing mitigation controls. Crucially, this analysis must also incorporate the qualitative impact on reputation, regulatory compliance, and operational continuity, which are often harder to quantify but equally, if not more, important. Aligning this analysis with the organization's defined risk appetite and tolerance is paramount. This approach represents best professional practice because it provides a data-driven, yet holistic, basis for decision-making, ensuring that resources are allocated effectively to manage risks that pose the greatest threat to the organization's objectives, and that decisions are made within the bounds of acceptable risk as defined by senior management and the board. This aligns with the principles of good governance and risk management expected in a regulated environment, where demonstrable due diligence in risk treatment is a key requirement. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to dismiss the risk solely because it has not yet materialized or because the immediate financial impact is not overwhelming. This fails to acknowledge the probability aspect of risk assessment and ignores the potential for future, significant losses. Ethically, this can be seen as a dereliction of duty, as it prioritizes short-term cost savings over long-term organizational resilience and stakeholder protection. From a regulatory perspective, it could lead to non-compliance if the unmitigated risk results in a breach of regulations or contractual obligations. Another incorrect approach is to implement overly aggressive and costly mitigation strategies without a thorough cost-benefit analysis or consideration of the organization's risk appetite. While seemingly prudent, this can lead to inefficient allocation of resources, potentially diverting funds from other critical areas or investments. This approach can also be seen as a failure to exercise professional judgment, as it lacks the strategic alignment necessary for effective risk management. It may also exceed the organization's tolerance for operational disruption or financial outlay for risk mitigation. A third incorrect approach is to rely solely on qualitative assessments without attempting to quantify potential losses or benefits. While qualitative analysis is valuable, particularly for reputational or strategic risks, neglecting quantitative measures can make it difficult to prioritize effectively against other risks or to justify investment in controls to stakeholders who require financial justification. This can lead to subjective decision-making and a failure to demonstrate a clear return on investment for risk management activities, potentially undermining the credibility of the risk management function. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a structured decision-making framework that begins with a clear understanding of the identified risk, its potential causes, and its consequences. This involves gathering data for both qualitative and quantitative analysis. The next step is to evaluate the risk against the organization's risk appetite and tolerance statements. This provides a benchmark for acceptable risk levels. Following this, a cost-benefit analysis of potential mitigation strategies should be conducted, considering not only financial costs and benefits, but also operational, reputational, and strategic impacts. The final decision should be documented, clearly articulating the rationale, the analysis performed, and how the decision aligns with the organization's risk management objectives and strategic goals. This systematic approach ensures that decisions are informed, defensible, and aligned with best practices in risk management. Question 16. The audit findings indicate a significant increase in successful phishing attacks and a general lack of employee vigilance against social engineering tactics. As the risk manager, you are tasked with developing a new security awareness program. Which of the following approaches would best address these findings and foster a stronger security culture? Option A. Develop training materials that are highly technical and assume a strong understanding of cybersecurity principles, delivered via a static online portal with no interactive elements. Option B. Implement a comprehensive program that includes regular, role-specific training modules, varied delivery methods, e.g., interactive workshops, short videos, ongoing awareness campaigns, and periodic, clearly communicated phishing simulations to reinforce learning and identify areas for improvement. Option C. Introduce a policy of immediate disciplinary action for any employee who clicks on a simulated phishing link, regardless of prior training or intent, to create a strong deterrent. Option D. Conduct a single, mandatory, all-day security awareness seminar annually, covering a broad range of topics with a focus on technical security controls. The correct answer is B. Implement a comprehensive program that includes regular, role-specific training modules, varied delivery methods, e.g., interactive workshops, short videos, ongoing awareness campaigns, and periodic, clearly communicated phishing simulations to reinforce learning and identify areas for improvement. Explanation: the audit findings indicate a recurring pattern of security incidents directly linked to employee susceptibility to social engineering tactics, particularly phishing. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the organization's need for robust security with the practicalities of employee training and the potential for creating a culture of fear or distrust. The risk manager must develop a security awareness program that is effective in mitigating threats without alienating employees or becoming overly burdensome. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a multifaceted ongoing strategy that addresses the root cause of the incidents. Developing training content that is relevant, engaging, and tailored to different roles within the organization, coupled with varied delivery methods and consistent awareness campaigns, fosters a stronger security culture. Phishing simulations and social engineering awareness training, when conducted ethically and with clear communication about their purpose, are crucial for reinforcing learning and testing the effectiveness of the program. This aligns with the principles of continuous improvement and proactive risk management expected in information security. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on punitive measures for employees who fall victim to phishing simulations is professionally unacceptable. This would likely create a climate of fear, discouraging employees from reporting suspicious activities or admitting mistakes, thereby hindering the organization's ability to identify and address vulnerabilities. It also fails to address the underlying educational gap and can lead to resentment and decreased morale, undermining the goal of building a positive security culture. Such an approach could also be seen as a failure to meet the ethical obligation to support and educate employees, rather than simply punish them for perceived failures. Another incorrect approach that relies on a single, annual, generic security awareness training session is insufficient. This method often leads to information overload, poor retention, and a lack of engagement, failing to keep pace with evolving threats. It does not provide the continuous reinforcement necessary to embed security best practices into daily operations, and does not adequately address the specific vulnerabilities exploited by social engineering. This approach represents a failure to implement a comprehensive and effective risk mitigation strategy. A third incorrect approach that involves overly technical and jargon-filled training content, delivered without consideration for the audience's technical proficiency, is also professionally flawed. This can lead to confusion, disengagement, and a perception that security is an IT-only concern, rather than a shared responsibility. It fails to make security concepts accessible and actionable for all employees, thus diminishing the overall effectiveness of the awareness program and the development of a strong security culture. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a thorough risk assessment to identify specific threats and vulnerabilities, followed by the design of a layered security awareness program. This program should incorporate diverse training methods, regular communication, and practical exercises like phishing simulations, all while emphasizing a supportive and educational rather than punitive approach. Continuous evaluation of the program's effectiveness through metrics and feedback is essential for adaptation and improvement. Question 17. The control framework reveals a consistent pattern of user-related security incidents, including successful phishing attacks, compromised credentials, and unauthorized access to sensitive data. As a CRISC professional, what is the most effective approach to address these vulnerabilities through user education, considering the impact assessment of potential security breaches? Option A. Conduct a comprehensive impact assessment to identify the most critical user-related risks and tailor educational content and delivery methods to mitigate those specific threats, ensuring ongoing reinforcement and measurement of effectiveness. Option B. Implement a broad, one-time phishing awareness training session for all employees to quickly address the most visible incident type. Option C. Develop a series of generic security awareness posters and emails covering a wide range of topics without prioritizing specific risks or assessing their impact. Option D. Focus solely on strengthening technical security controls, such as multi-factor authentication and intrusion detection systems, assuming user education is secondary. Correct answer is A. Conduct a comprehensive impact assessment to identify the most critical user-related risks and tailor educational content and delivery methods to mitigate those specific threats, ensuring ongoing reinforcement and measurement of effectiveness. Explanation. This scenario presents a common challenge in information security, the human element. While technical controls are crucial, user behavior significantly impacts an organization's risk posture. The professional challenge lies in designing and implementing effective user education programs that address multiple facets of cyber hygiene, including phishing, password security, social engineering, data privacy, safe browsing, and mobile device security, all within the context of the Certified in Risk and Information Systems Control (CRISC) domain. The impact assessment approach is vital because it requires understanding the potential consequences of user errors and tailoring education to mitigate those specific risks. The correct approach, focusing on a comprehensive, risk-based impact assessment of user education needs, represents best professional practice. This aligns with CRISC principles by prioritizing controls based on their potential to reduce identified risks, by assessing the likelihood and impact of various user-related threats, e.g., successful phishing leading to data breach, weak passwords enabling unauthorized access. An organization can allocate resources effectively to address the most critical vulnerabilities. This proactive, data-driven approach ensures that training is relevant, targeted, and demonstrably contributes to the overall risk management strategy, fulfilling ethical obligations to protect organizational assets and data. An incorrect approach that solely focuses on generic awareness training without assessing specific organizational risks fails to meet professional standards. This is because it may not address the most prevalent or impactful threats, leading to wasted resources and a false sense of security. Ethically, it could be considered negligent if critical risks are ignored due to a lack of proper assessment. Another incorrect approach that prioritizes technical controls over user education overlooks the fundamental reality that even the most robust technical defenses can be bypassed by a compromised user. This approach neglects the human factor, which is often the weakest link, and therefore fails to provide a holistic risk management solution. Professionally, it demonstrates a misunderstanding of the interconnectedness of technical and human controls. An incorrect approach that implements user education sporadically or reactively, without a structured, ongoing program, is also professionally deficient. This ad hoc method does not foster a consistent security culture and leaves the organization vulnerable to evolving threats. It fails to establish a sustainable risk mitigation strategy and may not comply with the spirit of continuous improvement expected in risk management. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured risk assessment framework. This includes identifying potential threats, analyzing vulnerabilities, including human factors, evaluating the likelihood and impact of risks, and then selecting and implementing appropriate controls, which in this case includes a well-designed user education program. The effectiveness of these controls should be continuously monitored and reviewed, with adjustments made based on new threat intelligence and performance metrics. Question 18. During the evaluation of the information security risk posture for a financial services organization operating under U.S. federal regulations, a risk analyst is tasked with identifying potential risks. The analyst has compiled a comprehensive inventory of all IT assets, including hardware, software, and data repositories. They have also gathered a list of known cyber threats from various threat intelligence feeds. Which of the following approaches would best align with the requirements for effective risk identification in this context? Option A. Focus on identifying the most sophisticated and prevalent cyber threats from global threat intelligence, and then map these threats to the organization's most valuable data assets to determine potential impacts. Option B. Prioritize the identification of vulnerabilities in the most recently deployed software application, assuming these are the most likely targets for attackers, and then assess the potential impact on system availability. Option C. Conduct a thorough review of the organization's asset inventory and categorize assets by their criticality, then identify general categories of threats that could affect these asset types without specific consideration of business processes or regulatory mandates. Option D. Analyze the interdependencies between critical business processes, identify assets supporting these processes, and then identify threats and vulnerabilities that could impact these assets and processes, explicitly considering U.S. federal regulatory requirements throughout the process. Correct answer is D. Analyze the interdependencies between critical business processes, identify assets supporting these processes, and then identify threats and vulnerabilities that could impact these assets and processes, explicitly considering U.S. federal regulatory requirements throughout the process. Explanation. This scenario presents a common challenge in risk management, balancing the need for comprehensive risk identification with the practical constraints of resources and time. The professional must demonstrate an understanding of how to prioritize efforts effectively while ensuring that critical elements of risk identification are not overlooked. The core of the challenge lies in moving beyond a superficial listing of assets and threats to a nuanced assessment of their interdependencies and potential impact on business processes. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it systematically integrates multiple facets of risk identification, aligning them with business objectives and regulatory mandates. By starting with business process analysis, the risk professional ensures that the identification of assets, threats, and vulnerabilities is contextualized within the organization's operational framework. This allows for a more accurate assessment of potential impacts, as it considers how disruptions to specific assets or exploitation of vulnerabilities would affect critical business functions. Furthermore, explicitly considering legal and regulatory requirements and industry standards during this phase ensures that the risk identification process is compliant and addresses known industry risks, thereby fulfilling the mandate of frameworks like those relevant to CRISC certification. This holistic and integrated approach is crucial for effective risk management. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on asset inventory without understanding their role in business processes fails to identify the true impact of threats. This is a regulatory failure because it can lead to underestimation of risk, potentially violating compliance obligations that require adequate risk assessment. Ethically, it represents a failure to exercise due diligence in protecting the organization's interests. Another incorrect approach that prioritizes threat identification over understanding vulnerabilities and their potential impact is also flawed. This can lead to a focus on unlikely or unexploitable threats, wasting resources and diverting attention from more immediate and probable risks. This is a professional failure as it demonstrates a lack of analytical rigor and an inability to prioritize effectively, potentially leading to noncompliance with risk management standards. A third incorrect approach that neglects the explicit identification of legal and regulatory requirements during the initial risk identification phase is a significant regulatory failure. Compliance is a cornerstone of information systems control, and overlooking these requirements can expose the organization to penalties, legal action, and reputational damage. It also demonstrates a lack of understanding of the scope of risk management as defined by professional standards. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured, iterative approach. First, understand the business context and critical business processes. Second, identify key assets supporting these processes. Third, identify relevant threats and vulnerabilities that could impact these assets and processes. Fourth, assess the potential impact of these threats and vulnerabilities on business processes, considering financial, operational, reputational, and legal/regulatory consequences. Fifth, explicitly map identified risks against legal, regulatory, and industry requirements. Finally, prioritize risks based on their likelihood and impact, and develop appropriate mitigation strategies. This systematic process ensures that risk identification is comprehensive, relevant, and actionable. Question 19. Consider a scenario where a financial services organization operating within the European Union is subject to the General Data Protection Regulation, GDPR. The organization collects significant volumes of customer personal data for various services, including account management, transaction processing, and marketing. The IT security team has implemented robust encryption for all data at rest and in transit. However, the organization lacks a formal, documented data retention policy that specifies how long different categories of customer data should be retained and how it should be securely disposed of or anonymized after that period. Which of the following approaches best aligns with GDPR requirements for data security and data lifecycle management? Option A. Develop and implement a comprehensive data retention policy that defines retention periods based on legal obligations, regulatory requirements, and business needs, and ensures secure deletion or anonymization of data upon expiry of these periods. Option B. Prioritize the creation of extensive data backups for all customer data, ensuring they are encrypted, and focus on recovery capabilities without establishing specific retention limits for the backup data itself. Option C. Immediately anonymize all customer data upon collection using a standard anonymization technique, without considering specific business purposes or the potential for re-identification, to minimize data exposure. Option D. Rely solely on the existing strong encryption measures to protect all collected customer data indefinitely, assuming that encrypted data is sufficiently protected regardless of retention duration. The correct answer is A. Develop and implement a comprehensive data retention policy that defines retention periods based on legal obligations, regulatory requirements, and business needs, and ensures secure deletion or anonymization of data upon expiry of these periods. Explanation. This scenario presents a common challenge in data governance, balancing the need for data utility with robust data protection requirements, particularly concerning sensitive personal information. The professional challenge lies in interpreting and applying the specific mandates of the General Data Protection Regulation, GDPR, to a practical data lifecycle management process. Careful judgment is required to ensure that all data processing activities, from collection to disposal, align with the principles of data minimization, purpose limitation, and security. The correct approach, which involves implementing a comprehensive data retention policy that aligns with legal obligations and business needs, represents best professional practice because it directly addresses GDPR Article 5 principles of storage limitation and integrity and confidentiality. By defining clear retention periods based on legal requirements, e.g., financial record keeping, and business necessity, and ensuring secure deletion or anonymization thereafter, an organization demonstrates accountability and compliance. This proactive approach minimizes the risk of holding data longer than necessary, thereby reducing the attack surface for data breaches and avoiding potential fines for noncompliance with data protection regulations. Furthermore, it supports the principle of data minimization by ensuring that only necessary data is retained. An incorrect approach that relies solely on technical encryption without a defined retention policy is professionally unacceptable. While encryption is a crucial security measure, it does not inherently address the GDPR requirements for data minimization and storage limitation. Holding encrypted personal data indefinitely, even if protected, can still violate the principle that personal data should not be kept for longer than is necessary for the purposes for which it is processed. Article 5.1. This could lead to regulatory scrutiny and potential penalties for failing to manage the data lifecycle appropriately. Another incorrect approach, which is to anonymize all data immediately upon collection without considering the business purpose or potential for re-identification, is also professionally flawed. While anonymization is a valid technique for data protection, it must be applied judiciously. If the anonymization is not robust enough to prevent re-identification, it may not satisfy GDPR requirements, and if it is applied prematurely, it can render the data useless for legitimate business purposes, violating the principle of purpose limitation. The GDPR requires that data processing be adequate, relevant, and limited to what is necessary in relation to the purposes for which they are processed. Article 5.1c. Finally, an approach that prioritizes data backup and recovery over retention policies, without clear guidelines on what data to back up, for how long, and under what conditions it can be accessed, is also problematic. While backups are essential for business continuity and disaster recovery, they must also be subject to data protection principles. Storing excessive amounts of personal data in backups indefinitely, even if encrypted, can create significant risks and compliance challenges. The GDPR requires that appropriate technical and organizational measures be in place to ensure a level of security appropriate to the risk. Article 32, which includes managing the life cycle of data in backups. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a thorough understanding of the applicable regulatory framework, in this case, GDPR, a clear definition of business objectives and data processing purposes, and a risk-based assessment of data security and privacy controls. This includes establishing clear data lifecycle management policies, including data retention and deletion schedules, and ensuring that technical controls like encryption and anonymization are implemented in alignment with these policies and regulatory requirements. Regular review and auditing of these processes are also critical to maintaining compliance and demonstrating accountability. Question 20. The control framework reveals that an organization needs to securely exchange sensitive financial transaction data with a third-party vendor. The primary requirements are to ensure that the data cannot be read by unauthorized parties during transit, that the data has not been tampered with, and that the sender can be definitively identified and cannot later deny having sent the transaction. The organization must also maintain an auditable record of these exchanges. Which of the following cryptographic approaches best addresses these requirements within a framework that emphasizes verifiable trust and accountability? Option A. Implement a robust public key infrastructure, PKI, using digital certificates to authenticate the vendor and the organization systems, and employ digital signatures generated with the organization's private key to sign transaction data before transmission. The data itself will be encrypted using a symmetric session key established through a secure handshake. Option B. Develop a proprietary encryption algorithm that combines elements of symmetric and asymmetric principles and distribute unique secret keys to each authorized user within the organization and to the vendor. Option C. Employ a hashing algorithm to generate a unique digest for each transaction. This digest will be transmitted alongside the unencrypted transaction data, and the vendor will recalculate the hash to verify integrity. Option D. Utilize a shared secret key for symmetric encryption of all transaction data. Both the organization and the vendor will possess this key, and a message authentication code, MAC, will be generated using the same key to ensure data integrity. The correct answer is A. Implement a robust public key infrastructure, PKI, using digital certificates to authenticate the vendor and the organization systems, and employ digital signatures generated with the organization's private key to sign transaction data before transmission. The data itself will be encrypted using a symmetric session key established through a secure handshake. Explanation. The control framework reveals a critical gap in the organization's ability to ensure the integrity and authenticity of sensitive data exchanged with external partners. The challenge lies in selecting the most appropriate cryptographic mechanism to meet specific security objectives within the constraints of a regulated environment, which mandates adherence to established standards for data protection and privacy. The scenario requires a deep understanding of cryptographic principles and their practical application in risk management, particularly concerning the non-repudiation and confidentiality requirements of interorganizational data flows. The correct approach leverages asymmetric key cryptography and digital certificates within a public key infrastructure, PKI, to address the stated requirements. This method provides a robust solution for non-repudiation because the private key used for signing is unique to the sender, making it difficult to deny sending the message. The corresponding public key, verified through a trusted certificate authority within the PKI, allows the recipient to confirm the sender's identity and the message's integrity. This aligns with regulatory expectations for secure data exchange and accountability, as it establishes a verifiable audit trail. The use of PKI ensures that the public keys are managed, distributed, and revoked securely, mitigating risks associated with key compromise. An incorrect approach would be to rely solely on symmetric key cryptography for this scenario. While symmetric encryption is efficient for bulk data encryption, it does not inherently provide non-repudiation. Both parties would share the same secret key, meaning either could have encrypted the message, making it impossible to definitively prove who sent it. This failure to establish non-repudiation would be a significant regulatory and ethical lapse, particularly in contexts requiring auditable transactions or proof of origin. Another incorrect approach would be to use hashing algorithms alone for the entire process. Hashing ensures data integrity by creating a unique fingerprint of the data. However, it does not provide confidentiality. The data itself is not encrypted, nor does it offer non-repudiation on its own. Without a mechanism to bind the hash to a specific sender's identity, the recipient cannot be certain who generated the hash, thus failing to meet the requirement for verifiable sender authentication and accountability. This would be a failure to implement controls commensurate with the risk of data tampering and unauthorized origin. Finally, attempting to implement a custom cryptographic solution without leveraging established PKI standards or widely accepted algorithms would be a grave error. Such an approach introduces significant security vulnerabilities due to the complexity of cryptographic design and implementation. It would likely violate regulatory requirements that mandate the use of proven, standardized cryptographic methods, and would be ethically irresponsible due to the high risk of introducing exploitable weaknesses, potentially leading to data breaches and loss of trust. Professionals should approach such situations by first clearly defining the security objectives: confidentiality, integrity, authenticity, non-repudiation, and the specific risks associated with the data exchange. They should then map these objectives to appropriate cryptographic tools and frameworks, prioritizing solutions that are standardized, well-vetted, and compliant with relevant regulations. A thorough risk assessment should guide the selection, and implementation should be followed by rigorous testing and ongoing monitoring.